Welcome back to the deep dive. For months we've been looking at all this really cutting edge stuff, the future of AI, massive geopolitical shifts, revolutionary science.
All forward-looking topics.
Exactly. But today we're doing something a little different. We're actually going backwards.
Wait.
We're going back to the foundational architecture of knowledge itself, to the single most influential philosophy that likely determines how and what you were taught in school.
That's right. We are turning our full attention to essentialism. I mean, when you picture a traditional school in your mind,
A classroom with desks and rows, a teacher at the front.
that's the one. You are almost certainly thinking of this philosophy in action. It's the structure, it's the backbone, and it's this unwavering conviction that certain knowledge is just non-negotiable for success.
And that really gets to the core mission of this deep dive. We want to figure out if essentialism, with its, intense focus on tradition and these strict core subjects, is just a dusty, irrelevant relic.
Something that's just too slow, too rigid for the modern world.
Right. Or is it the opposite? Does this approach actually hold the critical, maybe non-negotiable key to building genuinely strong, functional academic foundations? The kind of foundation that a modern, adaptable learner actually relies on to succeed.
And our source material, it frames essentialism as the philosophy of fundamental mastery. So to really understand its power, we can't just define it. We have to, dissect it.
We have to pull it apart.
Exactly. And for you, the learner, this means we've got to peel back all those layers and extract the absolute specific requirements, the core intellectual ingredients, if you will, that students are truly expected to internalize under this model.
We're looking for clarity here, for structure, and maybe for some surprising facts about an educational idea built on this almost ruthless principle that anything extra comes second.
It's a system of prioritization.
It really is. We're searching for the educational equivalent of the periodic table, the absolute non-negotiables that have to be mastered before the real fun, the innovation and the application can even begin. So let's unpack this system and see what actually makes the cut. Okay, so let's start with the name itself. Essentialism. It's not just some benign philosophy, is it? It's a very specific, highly structured educational blueprint with a lot of historical weight behind it.
Oh, absolutely.
So what, in its most basic form, does the essentialist mandate?
Well, the core idea is, on the surface, incredibly simple, but its application is where it gets really complex. It basically says there exists a defined, universal set of essential skills, subjects, and specific forms of knowledge that every single student must master.
Must. Not should, but must.
Must. This isn't optional knowledge. It's seen as the shared intellectual inheritance of humanity. The argument is, if you lack this core knowledge, your ability to participate meaningfully in civic life and economic life and intellectual life, it's fundamentally compromised.
So why that uncompromising focus on must master? Why is there no room for, say, a student to choose their own focus early on?
I think the best way to think about it is as a system of intellectual triage.
Triage?
Essentialists, they look at the sheer, overwhelming volume of human knowledge, and then they look at the very limited time you have in a K through 12 setting, and they basically declare that prioritization is paramount.
It's a resource management problem.
It is. They're asking, what is the irreducible minimum that is necessary for competence? And this focus, it does two things. First, it prevents what they would see as intellectual distraction. And second, it forces foundational competence over broad but ultimately superficial exposure.
So it's better to be a master of 5 subjects than to have just a passing familiarity with 20.
That's the belief, exactly. It reframes the whole debate. It isn't about being boring or old-fashioned. It's about being ruthlessly effective with limited time and resources.
Okay, so if we're building this foundational core, this intellectual irreducible minimum, what are they? What are those essential subjects that form this non-negotiable blueprint?
The sources consistently identify 5 pillars that form the required foundation of the essentialist curriculum. They often call it the essentialist core.
Let's lay them out because, these subjects literally dictate the academic life for millions and millions of students around the world.
Okay, so they are reading, writing, mathematics, science, and significantly, and this one is often included in the traditional structure, moral education.
Let's start with reading and writing. That's the classic 3 R's core, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why are they the absolute first priority?
Because they're seen as the ultimate tool subject.
Tool subjects?
Yeah. Essentialists don't just see them as subjects in themselves, but as the master keys that unlock everything else. Reading is the key to decoding all the accumulated knowledge of the past. It unlocks every history book, every philosophical text, every technical manual.
And writing.
Writing is the key to organized thought. You simply cannot formulate a coherent, complex idea without the disciplined structure that writing demands. To an essentialist, genuine literacy is the foundational gateway to all other participation, civic or academic. If you can't read fluently or write clearly, you are, for all intents and purposes, intellectually marooned.
And this fluency has to reach the level of mastery, right? It's not just about competence. So being able to sound out the words isn't enough. You have to be able to comprehend, to analyze, to critique the text.
Oh, absolutely. The rigor is all about demanding that deep comprehension. The essentialist classroom spends a huge amount of time on grammar, on vocabulary, on structured composition, because they view these as the internal machinery of effective communication.
The argument being, if a student can't build a complex sentence, they probably can't fully grasp a complex idea.
That's it, precisely. The rigor in writing actually trains the student's mind for logical presentation and argumentation.
Okay, next up we have mathematics and science. This seems to ground the student in the physical, measurable reality of the world.
It does. Mathematics gives you the indispensable language of logic, of measurement, and of reliable problem solving. It's the framework that lets us understand patterns and scale and quantitative analysis. Without mathematical competence, you're locked out of engaging with economics or engineering or even advanced sociology.
And science provides the method.
Right? Science gives you the empirical framework, the scientific method for understanding the natural world. It trains students in systematic inquiry, in hypothesis testing, and in a reliance on evidence over opinion.
So together they ensure the student is rationally grounded, that they're capable of critical quantitative analysis, and that they're prepared to engage with the technical side of modern life. It's the toolkit for surviving and contributing to a technological society.
Yes, and the approach here is so important. It's sequential and it's methodical. In math, you absolutely must master arithmetic before you can do algebra, and you have to master algebra before you can touch calculus.
There are no shortcuts.
None, because the later concepts rely entirely on the absolute, rock-solid security of that earlier foundational knowledge. This approach, it forces a kind of intellectual honesty.
Now, I want to talk about that fifth pillar you mentioned, moral education. In what seems like a purely academic structure, why is this considered essential? Why is it up there with calculus and chemistry as a core subject?
This is where we really have to dig into the historical and the civic context of the philosophy.
Hmm.
Essentialism sees education not just as preparation for a career, but for citizenship and for societal contribution.
So it's bigger than just getting a job.
Much bigger. Historically, moral education within this framework is about transmitting established values, things like punctuality, diligence, respect for authority, a strong work ethic, civic duty. It's the intentional teaching of social and behavioral competence.
So it's less about debating abstract philosophy and more about sort of practical societal function.
Precisely. Essentialists argue that a society simply cannot function if its citizens lack a foundational competence in behavior and in adhering to basic norms. I mean, if students are consistently late, or disorganized, or disrespectful of the learning environment,
Then their academic progress, and everyone else's, gets derailed.
it gets completely derailed. So discipline and moral conduct are seen as foundational competencies, just as critical as numeracy or literacy. The sources really emphasize that this pillar ensures students develop the ethics they need to interact successfully and respectfully within their community.
The main objective is not exploration or, broad exposure. It's about ensuring every single student has a rock-solid, non-negotiable foundation in these 5 key areas.
And the clarity that comes from that focus is a huge strength. The curriculum is explicit, the standards are high, and the expectation is universal. The goal is genuine, measurable competence and skills that our sources explicitly call crucial in every area of life.
I keep coming back to this analogy of building a skyscraper, and I think it's worth expanding on here. You have to start with the foundation.
Of course.
And if that concrete foundation is deep and secure and properly engineered, which means the student is truly proficient in reading, math, and logical thought, then, and only then, can you build whatever creative, complex, amazing architectural structure you want on the top 80 floors.
But if that foundation is shaky,
Right. If the student is weak in basic algebra or can't write a structured paragraph, the whole future building of their learning is it's inevitably going to collapse under the weight of more advanced concepts.
that analogy perfectly captures the essentialist justification. They would argue that things like innovative thinking and creativity, which modern schools often say they prioritize, are not skills that just exist in a vacuum.
They don't come from nowhere.
Exactly. You cannot innovate in quantum physics if you haven't first mastered basic algebraic principles. The foundation is the non-negotiable prerequisite for any kind of meaningful, practical application. Without that essentialist core, creativity is just, well, it's just enthusiastic ignorance.
That's a powerful defense. It makes the case that rigor isn't stifling, it's actually enabling. Okay, so we've defined what they teach. Now let's look at how they teach it, because that core belief in strong fundamentals,
Yeah.
it dictates the entire classroom environment, doesn't it? And the role of the teacher?
Oh, completely. The environment is almost universally described as structured, organized, and very distinctly teacher-led.
Teacher-led.
Yes. The whole setup is optimized for one thing, the efficient transmission and the deep absorption of that core knowledge.
Yeah.
Any ambiguity, any potential distraction is systematically designed out of the environment.
And that brings us right to the defining characteristic of the essentialist school. The teacher as the absolute expert authority in the room. This is where a lot of modern critics, they immediately raise their concerns.
Right. Because the philosophy views the teacher not as a peer, not as a facilitator, but specifically as the primary repository of essential knowledge. Knowledge acquired through years of study and experience. This authority is based entirely on expertise.
And their role is to make sure the students get accurate, reliable information.
The tried and tested knowledge passed down through generations.
Yes. So if the goal is to create a modern learner, one who needs to think independently and critically, doesn't that idea of absolute authority immediately raise some red flags? Doesn't it seem to discourage self-direction and independent thought? How do the sources defend that level of control?
The defense really centers on two words: efficiency and reliability.
Okay.
The essentialist view is that beginners cannot efficiently teach themselves the foundations of calculus or the rules of grammar. Learning foundational facts through, say, unsupervised independent discovery is just too time-consuming. It's incredibly prone to error, and frankly, it's often ineffective.
So the teacher as the expert just has the most efficient path to getting that accurate knowledge across.
Exactly. The control is seen as a necessary but temporary measure. It's there to ensure foundational truth and efficiency are prioritized over what they would call premature self-direction.
That distinction is so important. It's temporary control in service of long-term independence. And the source material, it details these specific, non-negotiable responsibilities for the teacher that really reinforce this. Let's look at those 4 functions.
Okay, so the essentialist teacher has 4 key functions that really govern the whole classroom dynamic.
Yeah.
First, they are responsible for setting the pace.
And this is non-negotiable.
Absolutely. Because sequential learning demands a structured progression. You cannot let students just move to the next unit until the prerequisite skills are fully mastered. This prevents those gaps in knowledge that just compound and get worse later on.
All right, number 2 is that the teacher has to take responsibility for delivering the content.
This positions the teacher as the primary, reliable conduit of information. It minimizes reliance on, a potentially inaccurate web search or peer-to-peer instruction where foundational errors might get introduced.
Okay. Third, they are responsible for maintaining discipline.
And it's crucial to understand this isn't just about punishment. It means ensuring the environment is calm, orderly, and entirely conducive to deep intellectual work. A chaotic environment is, by its very definition, an anti-essentialist environment because it distracts from the core mission.
And the fourth, and this one feels like the most important, is the teacher is responsible for holding students to clear, non-negotiable standards.
This is the metric of mastery. If the standards are subjective or vague, the entire premise of guaranteed competence just collapses.
This ensures intellectual honesty.
It does. The student knows exactly what mastery looks like, and the teacher knows exactly when the student has acquired that essential skill. The feedback loop is direct. It's unambiguous. If you miss these 5 questions on the math quiz, you do not move forward until you can demonstrate competence in those 5 underlying concepts.
So what are the deeper sort of psychological implications of this kind of uncompromising structure, especially today when flexibility is so often praised as a virtue?
The big implication is stability and consistency. And as we mentioned, this is just vital for young learners. The classroom becomes a predictable, reliable space.
A safe space in a way.
A very safe space. When students are assured of routine, predictability, and clearly defined boundaries, it creates a profound sense of psychological security. They don't have to spend their cognitive energy trying to figure out what the rules are or what the day's going to hold.
They can dedicate all of that mental capacity to the actual academic material.
That's it. The structure itself becomes a stabilizing force. It's not just about control. It's about minimizing the cognitive load of navigating the environment so that the maximum cognitive load can be applied to the learning.
The classroom becomes an optimized engine for knowledge transfer.
Yes.
Good.
And in the process, it teaches students order, expectation, and self-management, which are themselves essential life skills. The teacher's authority just ensures that engine is running efficiently towards that single measurable goal: universal competence in the core curriculum.
Okay, so the environment is structured for one specific outcome: mastery. Let's really dissect what that word means in the essentialist context, because it's clearly more than just getting a passing grade on a test.
Oh, much more. Mastery means absolute, reliable competence. It means the student has to internalize the concept so thoroughly that they can execute the skill efficiently, automatically, and accurately.
Automatically.
Yes. Essentialism is deeply, deeply unsatisfied with partial comprehension. If a student is learning to balance a chemical equation, mastery means they aren't guessing, they aren't hoping. They are applying internalized rules with speed and precision.
And to get to that level of deep, reliable competence, essentialism relies on some specific, and I think we can say sometimes unpopular, tools.
It does. The philosophy uses techniques that are proven to build that automaticity. Repetition, drills, extensive practice exercises, memorization, and very frequent detailed quizzes and assessments that are designed specifically to check and then recheck that underlying understanding.
No. When modern critics hear drills and repetition, they often jump right to the term rote learning, mindless, boring knowledge dumping. We need to be really clear here. What is the strategic, powerful difference between mindless rote learning and the essentialist goal of achieving cognitive automaticity?
That is the critical distinction. It's everything. Rote learning is often defined as just memorizing a fact without understanding its context or its application. Cognitive automaticity, which is the actual goal here, is the process of moving an understood skill or fact from the realm of conscious, slow effort
Into the subconscious rapid habit.
into a subconscious rapid habit. It's about building reliable internal tools.
Can you give us a concrete example that really illustrates that difference?
Yeah, I think the best one is driving a car. When you first learn, every single action is a conscious effort, right? You're thinking, check the mirror, check the blind spot, signal, apply the gas gently, turn the wheel just so.
Your entire brain is focused on just not crashing.
Your entire mental bandwidth is consumed by these foundational tasks. So if someone throws a complex situation at you, like a sudden lane change, while you're navigating a busy highway interchange, you panic. Your working memory is completely overloaded with the basics.
But once you achieve automaticity,
Right. Through repetition and practice, the drills of driving things like shifting, signaling, checking the mirror, they all move into the background.
Yeah.
Your brain is now free. Your working memory can be entirely dedicated to the complex, higher-level problem. Assessing the risk, planning your route, anticipating what other drivers are going to do.
That makes perfect sense. So in the classroom, memorizing, say, the multiplication tables isn't the end of learning.
Not at all.
It's the vital step that frees up the cognitive bandwidth you need for true mathematical application, for complex problem solving later on.
Exactly right. If a high school physics student has to stop and consciously calculate 8 times 7 every time they run an equation, their mental resources are being diverted from the actual physics problem. Automaticity provides that reliable internal database, freeing up the mind to focus on synthesis, on creativity, on dealing with ill-defined problems. The essentialist argument is we drill the basics so the students can be truly free to think complex thoughts later.
And this is where it gets, for me, really interesting. The profound psychological belief that underpins this whole insistence on rigorous, hard-won competence. It's explicitly stated in the sources. Confidence grows from competence. I think this needs to be emphasized as maybe the single most important takeaway.
It is the philosophical core of the essentialist moral argument. They critique this modern trend of trying to boost student self-esteem through, say, participation trophies or easy praise. They argue that kind of external validation is inherently fragile.
It's not real.
It's not real. True, resilient confidence is built on the undeniable internal reality of genuine capability. When a student solves a difficult differential equation or writes a flawlessly argued essay, they don't hope they're capable. They know they are.
And that competence It translates into resilience, doesn't it? If a student then faces a failure or a really difficult challenge, they trust that their core skills will eventually see them through because they remember the prior difficulty that they mastered through disciplined
And
practice.
that resilience is a critical life skill. Essentialists would argue that a student who is secure in their foundational knowledge is far more willing to attempt new, challenging tasks because they've internalized the truth that competence is earned, not given, and they have the tools to earn it.
Let's pivot now to the central role of discipline. The sources argue this isn't about control for the sake of control, it's more of an ethical commitment.
Yes, discipline is central because it creates that necessary distraction-free environment. Essentialists view classroom chaos as an ethical failure.
An ethical failure.
Yes, if one student is allowed to be disruptive, they are not only compromising their own learning time, they are actively stealing time and focus from every other student in that room.
So the discipline is actually a defense of the collective learning environment.
Precisely. And that structure forces the consistent practice of self-regulation and adherence to rules, which are themselves foundational skills for adult life and for any kind of collaborative work. The development of a strong work ethic, the ability to manage your time, the responsibility to complete required tasks, these are the practical, non-academic outcomes of a rigorously disciplined essentialist environment.
So it sounds like the essentialist teacher is simultaneously teaching the content and teaching the required high-performance behavior that's necessary to master that content.
The two are inseparable. You can't achieve cognitive automaticity without the sustained focus and the disciplined study habits that are necessary to endure repetition and practice. The structure is designed to support the development of these executive function skills, which, regardless of your future career path, are absolutely essential for long-term success. The rigor of the curriculum demands rigor in the conduct.
So a philosophy this deeply entrenched, this rigorous, it must generate some significant debate.
Oh, absolutely.
The rigor that provides profound strengths also inevitably creates some critical trade-offs. So we have to examine both the academic payoff and the necessary criticisms impartially.
This is really the moment for critical engagement. Essentialism delivers these profound strengths in foundational areas, but it faces these persistent challenges around flexibility and adaptability,
Hmm.
especially in a world that changes faster than any curriculum can possibly be updated. Hashtag, tag, Z, the strengths, the academic payoff.
Okay, let's start with the undisputed payoffs. The first one has to be clarity and expectations.
The strength here is its absolute instructional clarity. And that's for everyone involved, teachers, students, parents. Essentialism makes sure everyone knows exactly what is being taught and exactly what academic excellence is supposed to look like.
There's no guesswork.
No guesswork. This reduces the time you spend debating the curriculum or dealing with ambiguity, and it maximizes instructional time focused on the core learning.
And that clarity, it leads directly to the second big strength, guaranteed outcomes, particularly in strong literacy and numeracy skills.
This is essentialism's strongest defense, especially in a global context. When it's implemented rigorously, it tends to deliver guaranteed minimum outcomes in those core subjects. You can often see this reflected in international comparative test scores, where highly structured, core-focused educational systems often excel in math and reading proficiency across the general student population.
By prioritizing those skills above everything else, you just increase the odds that graduates have the basic tools they need.
You significantly increase the likelihood that they possess the foundational tools for both civic and economic participation.
Yes. And we talked about the safe and predictable environment. That's another major strength, especially when you're managing a diverse classroom.
Right. When you have high-stakes learning goals, routine is the psychological anchor. This is especially true in early education or for diverse student populations who might not have that kind of stability outside of school.
A predictable environment lowers anxiety.
It minimizes anxiety, making the classroom this high-functioning, safe engine where students know the boundaries and can just focus exclusively on intellectual absorption. The structure protects the learning process itself.
Then there's the teacher empowerment aspect. Essentialism really elevates the teacher's role.
It does. It elevates the profession by recognizing the value of expertise. By positioning the teacher as the expert authority who is responsible for delivering reliable content, it gives them the control and the structure they need to execute the curriculum efficiently. Teachers feel more effective, more confident in meeting goals when they aren't constantly debating what to teach.
but can instead focus on how best to teach the established essential material.
Exactly. And finally, you have its unparalleled efficiency for sequential subjects.
Things where concepts stack on top of each other.
Right. Grammar, coding, physics, mathematics. For any subject like that, essentialism is perfectly tailored. It systematically ensures that prerequisite knowledge is mastered before moving forward. This creates an incredibly solid intellectual ladder, making sure that gaps are identified and filled immediately, which prevents the future collapse of that knowledge structure. Hashtag BB. The criticisms, the flexibility concerns.
But of course, that very same rigor and structure, it creates trade-offs that critics always seize upon. And the first major concern is rigidity.
Right. Critics will argue that essentialism is inherently backward-looking. Its emphasis on tradition and an established curriculum can make it excessively rigid and very slow to adapt to new scientific discoveries or societal shifts or emerging tech fields.
The curriculum is set in stone.
If the curriculum is set in stone as essential, then updating that curriculum can become this drawn-out, highly political process, and that can lead to a significant lag in the content.
Can you give us an example of that kind of curriculum lag?
Sure. Think about something like computational thinking or climate science. If an essentialist curriculum was set, say, 30 years ago, it might focus very heavily on classical literary analysis or specific historical events, but leave very little dedicated time for these rapidly emerging fields.
The content is considered essential because it was essential to the previous generation.
Exactly. And that creates a time delay in preparing students for the current reality.
Okay, the next major critique is that essentialism can limit creativity or even student voice because the environment is so teacher-centric, not learner-centric.
This is the fundamental philosophical fault line. When the teacher is the authoritative content deliverer, the curriculum dictates the pace, and it dictates the topic. There is simply less structured room for the student to pursue genuine inquiry or to define their own problems or to engage in collaborative projects that require self-direction.
And critics worry that by prioritizing compliance and absorption,
The system inadvertently teaches students to wait for instruction rather than initiating independent thought.
that feels like a very valid concern for a world that demands an entrepreneurial spirit and self-starters.
It does. Now, essentialists would respond by saying you need the tools before you can be a self-starter, but the criticism remains. If all the answers are delivered by the expert, where does the habit of finding answers independently ever get a chance to develop?
And this feeds right into the worry about rote learning versus deep understanding. Is the system just prone to reducing learning to test prep?
This is the system's key vulnerability, and it's often exploited by standardized testing regimes. If the sole measure of mastery becomes a quiz based on memorized facts, teachers can be pressured to focus strictly on the drill mechanism, that surface-level recall, rather than ensuring the student can genuinely apply that knowledge in unfamiliar, novel situations.
So the risk is you produce a student who can flawlessly recite historical dates or chemical properties.
But they cannot synthesize that information to solve a real-world, messy problem.
You end up with a student who performs at a high level, but is brittle when they're faced with ambiguity.
Exactly. They perform brilliantly in that controlled environment, but may really struggle when the parameters of the problem aren't so clearly defined.
And the final major criticism focuses on skills for the modern world. The sources specifically call out things like collaboration, innovation, and complex problem solving.
These are often framed as the 21st century skills, and they thrive on interaction, on ambiguity, on interdisciplinary thinking. Essentialism, with its focus on individual mastery and structured single-subject delivery, often sidelines these skills.
And essentialists would argue you need the foundation to innovate.
They would.
Yeah.
But critics worry that the time spent meticulously drilling facts takes critical development time away from practicing the flexible, adaptive thinking that's necessary to collaborate on these ill-defined challenges.
It's a profound trade-off, isn't it? We guarantee competence in the basics, ensuring nobody gets left behind in fundamental skills, but maybe at the expense of developing the flexible thinking needed for the unknown challenges of the future.
It forces us to ask a really tough question. What is the higher priority? Is it better to ensure a student can accurately and independently solve a complex algebraic equation, or to teach that student to collaboratively define a complex problem that requires algebra, even if their foundational skills aren't 100% automated yet?
And essentialism has a very clear answer to that.
It emphatically favors the former, viewing it as the non-negotiable prerequisite for the latter.
So given the weight of all these criticisms, the rigidity, the lack of focus on collaboration, the teacher-centric control, how does essentialism manage to survive? let alone thrive on a global scale.
I think it's because it remains one of the most widely used philosophies in the world because, despite all the philosophical critiques, its methods are just demonstrably effective at achieving basic literacy and numeracy outcomes efficiently.
At the end of the day, the foundational principles work.
They work. And furthermore, the philosophy is just deeply integrated into the institutional DNA of education. I mean, many teachers, even those who would identify with more progressive movements, use essentialist practices unconsciously.
Like what?
Structured lesson planning, setting clear expectations, a focus on mastery of core subjects. These are just the default settings for efficient teaching because they have proven successful for decades.
So it's the structural default. But let's go back to that adaptability check. Can essentialism really escape the old-fashioned label when the world is demanding such rapid change?
I think it can because essentialism doesn't have to be old-fashioned. The philosophy's mandate is simply to prioritize the foundational knowledge. It doesn't actually mandate how that knowledge must be delivered.
Okay.
So when the commitment to essentialist rigor, that deep, uncompromising push for mastery, is balanced with more modern pedagogical approaches, it provides what our sources call a strong academic backbone, while still allowing plenty of room for dynamic engagement.
That distinction is so crucial. The essentialist goal remains the same, mastery of core subjects, but the methods can evolve.
Right.
So you can still use repetition and drill, but maybe that drill is delivered through some gamified application that gives instant feedback and targeted help instead of just a dry worksheet.
Precisely. The core commitment is the same. Competence must be earned through rigorous practice. But the tools you use to achieve that practice can be completely updated and customized. I mean, technology, for example, can massively enhance an essentialist teacher's ability to assess, to track mastery, and to personalize drills to make sure no student moves forward until that required automaticity is reached.
The philosophy itself is timeless, even if the delivery mechanisms aren't.
That's a great way to put it.
And this brings us to the real synthesizing question here, which is more about utility than it is about judgment.
The real question is, how can we consciously and strategically use its strengths, the strong foundations, the clarity, the discipline, the academic rigor, to support students, while at the same time actively making space for the needs of today's world, which, demands adaptability and flexibility and collaboration.
So it sounds like the most effective modern educational systems, they aren't purely essentialist,
Not at all.
but they use essentialism as the structural core, the intellectual skeleton upon which all the other learning is hung.
That is the modern synthesis. Essentialism provides the necessary depth in core subjects to ensure genuine competence. Without that competence, any efforts at creativity or collaboration are just superficial. They lack grounding. You have to master the language of logic before you can truly engage in high-level critical thinking.
And you have to master the mechanics of writing before you can formulate a revolutionary idea.
Exactly. So the final synthesis, based on our source material, is that the pursuit of a strong, solid intellectual foundation. It's not old-fashioned.
It is, by its very nature, absolutely essential.
It's the necessary prerequisite for all meaningful future endeavor, whether that endeavor is scientific or artistic or civic. #outro, wrap up in the next inquiry.
Wow, what a deep dive this has been. We started with the 5 pillars of the essentialist curriculum. We moved into that tightly controlled, efficient environment of the classroom. And then we rigorously analyzed the mechanics of mastery repetition drills and that powerful, resilient idea that confidence flows directly from genuine competence.
And we also weighed the heavy costs of that rigor against the vital need for flexibility in modern schooling.
We did.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, essentialism provides students with competence and this resilient confidence, but its deeply structured teacher-centric nature. It raises a really important question. In a system that is so efficient at knowledge transfer, how and when do we also foster independent exploration and self-directed learning?
Right. The structure is a powerful engine, but where does the student learn how to drive it for themselves and choose their own destination?
That's the question.
So building on the material, here's the provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider as you reflect on this journey. If collaboration and critical thinking and innovation are the truly necessary skills for navigating a rapidly changing world, how much foundational mastery, how much essentialist rigor must be achieved before the pursuit of those adaptive skills becomes genuinely effective and not just, performative?
Where is that tipping point?
Exactly. Where is the tipping point between mastering the basics to achieve that automaticity and then applying those basics creatively and collaboratively in some unknown future scenario?
And that tension is the enduring challenge for educators today, balancing the necessary depth of the foundation with the absolute imperative to innovate. Thank you for diving into the fundamental bedrock of learning with us.
And as mentioned in our source material, our next philosophical deep dive will move to the complete opposite side of the spectrum.
We'll be exploring constructivism, the philosophy that believes students build knowledge primarily through hands-on experience, social interaction, and inquiry, rather than through structured transmission from an expert.
Stay with us as we continue to explore the philosophies that build minds.